For years, European tourists have walked through Morocco's borders like a breeze. No paperwork, no interviews, no delays. Just a stamp, a smile, and straight into the maze of Marrakesh or the beaches of Agadir. But for Moroccans dreaming of stepping onto European soil, that's a different world entirely. Long queues, endless documents, and rejection letters don't just deny a visa, but deny dignity. In 2023 alone, Africans lost over 56 million euros. Not on travel, not on adventure, but on Schengen visa applications that were thrown in the trash.
The White House is considering a major expansion of travel restrictions, one that could affect millions across multiple continents. And Africa could be the hardest hit.
Now Morocco is making a move that could change the game forever. A visa requirement, but for Europeans. It's a decision that has left some in shock, some in applause, and others in quiet panic. Because this isn't just about visas. It's about power. It's about equality. And it's about time. Because Morocco isn't alone in this. Other African nations are watching. Some are already preparing to follow. And for the first time, Europe is facing a reality it never expected. The rules of the game are no longer theirs to dictate. But why is Morocco doing it? Let's find out. For decades, the visa system has been a silent tool of power, a gatekeeper that determines who gets to move freely and who is trapped behind bureaucratic walls. If you were European, the world was open to you. If you were African, your passport was a burden. The system wasn't just unfair, it was designed to favor one side. Now Morocco is about to change that. This proposal isn't just about requiring visas for European travelers. It's a message, a statement that says, we see the imbalance, we feel the double standards, and we're ready to change them. Oh, understand why this move is so significant. We need to go beyond the surface. This isn't just about tourism, politics, or paperwork. It's about power, history, and the unspoken rules that have governed global travel for too long. For years, Europeans have enjoyed borderless travel across Africa. They could step off a plane in Morocco, Kenya, or Senegal and walk straight through customs without so much as a second glance. No visa applications, no interrogations, no endless lists of required documents, just a passport, a stamp, and an open door. For them, travel was effortless. But for Africans trying to enter Europe, a different world entirely. A Moroccan citizen dreaming of visiting Paris or Madrid is met with a mountain of paperwork, bank statements, proof of employment, hotel reservations, and return tickets, all meticulously examined by embassy officials. The visa fees alone can be staggering, especially when you consider the fact that none of it is refundable. If a European visa officer decides to reject an application, that money is gone. No explanation, no appeal. Just a silent, unspoken message. You are not welcome here. In 2023 alone, Africans lost an estimated 56 million euros, not on flights, hotels, or vacations, but on visa applications that were outright denied. That's 56 million euros poured into a system designed to keep them out. The process is not just inconvenient, it's a financial drain, a form of exclusion that benefits only one side. Meanwhile, Europeans have continued to roam Africa freely, treating the continent as an extension of their playground. The privilege was so normalized that few ever stopped to question it. Until now. Morocco's decision to propose visa restrictions for Europeans is nothing short of revolutionary. It flips the script in a way that many never expected. Suddenly, for the first time, European travelers may have to experience what it feels like to be on the other side of the visa struggle. They may have to apply in advance, justify their stay, and pay fees. And for the first time, some of them may even face rejection. The same uncertainty, the same frustration that Africans have endured for years, could soon be part of the European travel experience. Predictably, the reaction has been swift. Many Europeans accustomed to seamless travel have expressed concern. Some tourism experts warn that the move could hurt Morocco's economy, suggesting that European travelers might reconsider visiting if faced with visa requirements. Others dismiss it as a temporary political gesture, something unlikely to become a long-term reality. But beneath these surface-level debates, there's something deeper at play. The real concern isn't just about tourism, it's about losing control. For decades, Europe has dictated the rules of global mobility. It decided who could enter and who could not, crafting policies that kept African travelers at arm's length while ensuring that its citizens remained free to move anywhere they pleased. If African nations start enforcing true reciprocity, if they start demanding the same level of scrutiny for European travelers, then suddenly the balance of power shifts. And that is what truly unsettles some. Morocco is not alone in this. Across the continent, the idea of visa reciprocity is spreading. Namibia has already implemented similar measures. Senegal is considering the same. If Morocco moves forward with this policy, other nations will be watching closely. And if they follow suit, Europe may wake up to a world where its citizens are no longer immune to the same travel restrictions they've imposed on others for decades. The road ahead is uncertain, but one thing is clear. Morocco's move isn't just about visas. It's about something much bigger. It's about respect. For too long, visa policies have sent a clear message. Europeans are welcome everywhere. Africans are not. Now Morocco is rewriting that message. If Europe demands visas, Morocco will demand them too. If Europe wants equal treatment, it will have to give it in return. Some will argue that this is a risky decision and that Morocco's economy depends on European tourists. But sometimes dignity is worth more than dollars. The age of one-sided privilege is coming to an end. And as the world watches, the question remains, will Europe accept this shift, or will it fight to hold on to an outdated system of control? Travel has always been political. Every stamp on a passport, every border crossed, every visa approved or denied. It all tells a deeper story about power. Who controls mobility? Who gets to move freely? And who gets left behind? Europe answered these questions in its favor. Now, with Morocco's proposed visa requirements for European travelers, those answers are being rewritten. At its core, a visa is more than just a travel document. It is a symbol of sovereignty and control. When a country grants visa-free access, it is making a statement. We trust you. We welcome you. We see you as an equal. When a country imposes strict visa requirements, it is doing the opposite. We do not trust you. We need to control you. You are not entitled to easy access. Europe has played this game masterfully for years, using its visa policies to dictate global mobility. African nations, on the other hand, have often been forced to accept a one-sided arrangement, granting easy entry to Europeans while their citizens faced a wall of restrictions in return. But what happens when Africa starts playing by the same rules? What happens when European travelers who have long taken their visa-free privileges for granted suddenly find themselves at the mercy of African immigration officers? That is the shift Morocco is proposing, and it is sending shockwaves through diplomatic circles. The idea of restricting European travelers isn't just about fairness, it's about leveraging power in global negotiations. Europe has always used visas as a tool of influence. If a country aligns with European interests, it enjoys smoother travel policies. If it resists, travel becomes harder. Visa policies have been wielded like a weapon of diplomacy, rewarding allies and punishing those who refuse to comply. Take, for example, the way Europe treats different African nations. Some countries, like South Africa, have relatively easier access to Schengen visas. Others, like Nigeria, face some of the highest rejection rates in the world. This isn't a coincidence. It's a calculated decision based on political and economic interests. European nations are careful about who they allow in, ensuring that only those they consider low risk or economically beneficial make it through. Meanwhile, wealthy European tourists have walked through Africa's borders effortlessly, enjoying safaris, resorts, and cultural experiences without ever questioning why the system worked in their favor. But now, Morocco is changing the rules. If European tourists want to visit, they might have to go through the same bureaucratic hurdles that Africans have faced for decades. And the timing of this proposal is no accident. It comes at a moment when Africa is gaining more confidence on the global stage, demanding respect and renegotiating its relationships with former colonial powers. But there is also the issue of perception. For years, European media has framed Africa as a continent in need, needing aid, investment, needing approval from global powers. But what happens when Africa starts imposing its conditions? When it stops playing by Europe's rules and start making its own? That is what makes this visa policy so significant. It is not just about who gets to travel. It is about who gets to decide the terms of engagement. Of course, European officials will likely push back. They will argue that such a move could hurt Morocco's economy, particularly its tourism sector. They might even suggest that restricting European travelers would be self-sabotage, a decision that could reduce foreign revenue. But these arguments overlook a crucial point. African nations have always been expected to prioritize Western economic interests over their sovereignty. This time, Morocco is making it clear that dignity and equality are just as important as financial gains. For years, Europe's visa policies have operated under an unspoken assumption that Africa would always accept the imbalance, and that African countries would never dare to impose the same restrictions in return. Morocco is now challenging that assumption. Whether or not the policy is implemented, the very discussion of it is enough to send a message. The days of unquestioned European privilege in Africa may be coming to an end. The bigger question now is how Europe will respond. Will it accept the reality of a world where it no longer sets all the rules? Or will it attempt to hold on to a system that is rapidly unraveling? One thing is certain: this is just the beginning. Africa is no longer waiting for permission to demand equality. It is taking it. Let's talk about the reaction for now. When Morocco's proposal to impose visa requirements on European tourists made headlines, the first reaction from Europe was a mixture of shock and disbelief. For decades, unrestricted travel to Africa was an unspoken guarantee, a privilege so deeply ingrained that few Europeans ever considered the possibility that it could be taken away. And yet, here was Morocco, one of the most visited African countries, suggesting that European travelers might soon have to go through the same bureaucratic nightmare that Africans have endured for years. At first, there was denial. European commentators dismissed the idea as a political stunt, a reactionary move that would never be enforced. They pointed to Morocco's reliance on European tourism, arguing that it would never risk alienating the millions of travelers who pour money into its economy every year. But as the news spread and the possibility became more real, the tone began to shift. Suddenly, what had seemed unthinkable was now being discussed with urgency. European travel forums and news sites are filled with anxious questions. Would this apply to all EU countries? How much would the visa cost? Would long-time visitors be exempt? The very idea of being required to apply for a visa, something millions of Africans have had to do for decades, was unsettling to many Europeans. And then came the fear. Not just fear of inconvenience, but fear of losing control. Because this wasn't just about tourism. This was about a deeper shift in power. One of the strongest arguments against Morocco's proposal was economic. Wouldn't this hurt Morocco more than it hurt Europe? After all, European tourists make up a significant portion of Morocco's annual visitors, and the tourism industry is a key pillar of its economy. Critics insisted that requiring visas could discourage travel, pushing Europeans to choose easier, visa-free destinations instead. But this argument reveals an outdated assumption that Africa must always bend to the desires of Western tourists, no matter the cost. Morocco is not the same country it was 20 or 30 years ago. Its tourism industry is diversifying, attracting travelers from China, the Middle East, and other parts of Africa. The assumption that Morocco is entirely dependent on European visitors is rooted in an old colonial mindset, one that imagines Africa as an extension of Europe's leisure and business interests. What many in Europe fail to understand is that Morocco is thinking beyond short-term economic concerns. This proposal isn't just about money, it's about sovereignty. It's about sending a message. If Europe insists on strict visa policies for Moroccans, then Morocco will do the same. Another aspect of the European reaction has been hypocrisy, the refusal to acknowledge how unfairly Africans have been treated by European visa policies for decades. For years, European governments have made it nearly impossible for Africans to travel freely. Visa applications are expensive, rejections are common, and the criteria for approval are often unclear. Yet, when the situation is reversed, when the slightest restriction is placed on European travelers, the outrage is immediate. This double standard is not new. It has its roots in Europe's colonial history, a time when African lands were open to European settlers and businesses, but Africans themselves had no rights to movement or mobility. Even today, the language used to describe migration reflects this colonial bias. Europeans who move to Africa are called expats, while Africans who move to Europe are labeled migrants, refugees, or economic burdens. For years, European countries have justified their visa policies by arguing that they are necessary for security, economic stability, and migration control. If Morocco, Senegal, or Namibia were to say, "We must protect our economy and national security from an uncontrolled influx of European travelers," would that be accepted as reasonable? Or would it be seen as an attack on Western freedoms? The anxiety in Europe isn't just about Morocco, it's about what happens next. Morocco may be the first North African country to propose such a policy, but it won't be the last. Senegal is already considering similar restrictions. Namibia has implemented them. Other nations, particularly those that have long suffered from Europe's strict visa policies, may start seeing this as a necessary act of reciprocity. For European governments, this presents an uncomfortable dilemma. They have spent years crafting policies that make it difficult for Africans to travel. They have justified these policies as necessary for maintaining economic stability and preventing migration. But if African nations start enforcing the same rules, Europeans will be forced to experience the very system they created. The truth is that Morocco's visa proposal has touched a nerve in Europe because it exposes an uncomfortable reality: that Europe's historical dominance over African travel and mobility is coming to an end. What happens next will depend on whether European nations choose to adapt to this new reality or fight to maintain a system that is no longer sustainable. One thing is certain: Africa is no longer waiting for Europe to change. It is making the changes itself. Now the question here is, why does Europe fear visa reciprocity? The concept of visa reciprocity, the idea that travel restrictions should be equal on both sides, has always been something that Europe has resisted when it comes to Africa. While the European Union enforces strict visa policies on African travelers, it has long expected African nations to remain open to European visitors without restrictions. The argument has always been that Europe is a key economic partner, and therefore visa-free access for Europeans is in Africa's best interest. But this claim ignores the reality that economic partnerships should be built on mutual respect, not one-sided privileges. Morocco's move is forcing a question that European policymakers have long tried to avoid. Why should African nations continue granting unrestricted access to European travelers when their citizens are treated like security threats the moment they apply for a visa? And that's where the real problem lies. If European travelers are suddenly required to apply for visas to enter African nations, they will, for the first time, experience the same restrictions that have been imposed on Africans for decades. They will feel the frustration of endless paperwork, the uncertainty of approval, and the indignity of rejection. More importantly, European governments will no longer have full control over the visa narrative. They will be forced to negotiate with African nations on an equal footing, something they have carefully avoided for years. Beyond the inconvenience for travelers, Morocco's visa move carries an even greater risk for Europe. It exposes the flaws and hypocrisy of the European visa system itself. If European travelers begin to complain about the difficulties of obtaining visas for Morocco, it will force a conversation about why African travelers have been subjected to the same process for so long. Europe has always justified its visa policies with vague explanations about security, migration control, and economic stability. But now, the very same logic is being used against them. If Morocco and other African nations argue that they must protect their own economic and national security by limiting European access, how can Europe oppose it without admitting to the double standard that has existed for decades? It is very simple. Europeans want to be treated as masters, but now it is nothing more than their dream. Do you think Morocco did the right thing? Should more nations do it? Let us know in the comments section. Is there even a way to stop Morocco? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about. Thanks for watching, And until the next video, stay tuned.